So without further ado, let's introduce Chase Clemons. Chase, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. So I've been with Basecamp since 2011, so it's not my first time around the rodeo on this kind of stuff. Started frontline support like a lot of people do, and then worked my way up into still doing lots of interactions with customers and emails and trainings and calls and that fun stuff, but also doing product strategy help as well. So yeah, that's me.
Very cool. And so you've been with Basecamp now for, is it 6 or 7 years?
7 years, yeah.
7, wow, fantastic. So we have a list of preset questions for you, Chase, since you are such an expert on the topic. No pressure. And throughout this webinar, I want to make it clear again to anyone who's joined in the past few minutes, you are more than welcome to submit questions or just opinions, but more so questions for Chase through this lovely chat feature. So if you go to the bottom portion of your screen, you can see that little bubble, the chat bubble, and click that and go for it. And as well as Q&A, preferably you can go into this Q&A feature, click that and submit those questions, and I myself will be opening them. So be thinking as we go through these questions. Okay, so let's get started, Chase. So you have done plenty around customer feedback. It's a huge aspect of any company that is dealing with a software or service or product, and it's taking the most important person out of anyone in the company, the customer, and figuring out how you might improve things according to him or her. So what for you, Chase, is the most important aspect of customer feedback? I'm sure there's plenty of things you can think about, but what do you think?
The main thing you're looking for is the situation they're in. It doesn't matter. You hear a lot about demographics. You hear a lot about personas. You hear a lot about characteristics of your customers in general. The big thing that matters and that cuts across everything that you've got is going to be what situation they're in whenever they send you that product feedback, that feature request, or that email in general. So you can have somebody that is literally miles apart in industry. You can have somebody that works at a university. And on the other side of things, you can have somebody that's out in the field every day as a construction engineer, and they might have the same situation on a daily basis that they need your product to handle. So it's all about the situation, and that's our job on the support side, is to, when we hear those customer feature requests, when we hear that feedback, we've got to figure out the situation they're in first. That way we kind of have the story that we can look at and keep going forward from there.
Fantastic. So really that contextual element of everything.
Yeah, it's a lot like being a detective, right? That was one of the things that, the analogy I like to use is that you're a support detective, right? So when somebody sends you some feedback or feature request or whatever, your job at that point is to kind of figure out all the things going on around that person. You know, what they did that morning, what they did before emailing you, what the lay of the land looked like. You basically go out and investigate. If you've ever seen like a police drama, you know, all that, like interviewing eyewitnesses and being on the scene and taking lots of notes and facts and all that. That's your job, is to go in and get all of that and bring it back to the team, because that gives you a starting point.
How cool. And so applicable and intuitive, because obviously support is doing that. The nature of a support ticket is to figure out what's happening, but I feel like you are introducing this whole new world of figuring out how to diagnose and detect what a customer's feeling or dealing with, and that is, anyway, a fantastic way to impact. So
yeah, I mean, you think about like right now how the majority of folks how the majority of folks approach categorizing and looking at new ideas, new features that they're hearing from customers, right? I call it the tag the hell out of everything kind of idea. So you go in, you get an email, somebody says, I need your product to do X. So you throw a tag on it that says X, and you move on to the next one. And the next one says, I need feature Y in your product. It's that tag the hell out of everything approach.
Yes.
And after you've got all these tags, you're left trying to figure out what happens then, you know? That doesn't really help, because you've got this group of people that all want the same feature, but they might want the same feature for a ton of different reasons. And the reasons there, the situations, that's what you're after. So here at Basecamp, I mean, we've been down that road. We tried to just tag every single thing that come through and hope that we can make sense out of it on the back end of things, and it just doesn't work. Or I'll say this, my always, like, your mileage may vary caveat here. It might work for you. It definitely didn't work for us.
And how's that for empathy, right? Interesting. Okay, very fascinating. So next question, Chase, what is the most important aspect of customer feedback? No. What is a good mindset to have when dealing with customer issues?
Yeah, you're always looking for that inquisitive mindset. It's kind of like, you know, I got a brother that works in the automotive industry, and they play the 5 why game. So you start with kind of step 1, and then you work through why they need that, and then you work through another why that they need that, and you just kind of keep working your way back until you kind of get at the root cause of what they're looking for. So that mindset of going, all right, the customer is telling me X, but X is probably not the whole story. There's probably more to it than that. That sets you up in the right mindset to actually start asking questions and digging a little bit deeper. So if you're not in that investigative mindset, if you're not in that, like, curiosity mindset, then it's going to be really challenging to figure out what's really going on.
Interesting. Wow. So I have a question that I'm going to ask from one of the panelists here. What do you do when you feel like you have important feedback, but product isn't interested?
Yeah. Man, that's the question that we all try to figure out, right? So it's twofold. The first is product has to be interested in what your support team is hearing, right? If they're not interested, you can give them good information all day long, and they're not going to listen to you. So part of it's going to be on them. Part of it is on them realizing that the support team is a valuable wealth of knowledge of what customers are going through, and they need to tap into that. So that's part of it. The other part, the thing that you can actually control here, is you have to give up the best information possible. And when you do that, it makes it a lot easier for product to step in and actually use that information. So if you're giving up just kind of crap answers and crap situations and things like that, well, of course product's not going to listen if they're not getting anything valuable from it. It's a lot different if you're going up and saying, look, I'm giving you this just gold plate of great customer information, then they're more likely to engage with you. So it's twofold. There's part of it that they're not going to be able to control. And we've all worked with product teams before that just had no interest in hearing from the support side of things. And that's tough. The thing that you can control here is what you actually offer up. And the better you're offering, the more likely that they're going to engage with that.
How neat. So putting that kind of, like you said, on like a golden platter of feedback,
yeah,
and treating the product team the way that we're always so conditioned to treat the customer, not that that would stop for the customer, but you're transferring that treatment and forwarding it on to the product team, incentivizing them, like giving that value. Very interesting. Thanks to whomever asked that question.
A lot of times, like, you get in and it's like you're working with these customers, and we're so customer oriented that we want to fix that problem for the customer. You got to turn around, like you said, and do the same thing for your internal teams. They're running into problems too, and it's our job to help figure out, like, how to best approach that problem and how to solve that problem. Now, just like a customer, they might not always listen to you, but that doesn't change the job that you're doing.
Right. So don't get swayed to and fro. Just, you need to stick to those priorities. So someone said, how can we guess when the customer will be receptive in the future? How can you gauge that? How can you decipher?
Yeah, I don't know if there is a good answer for that, or at least one that I've found. Because it's like, when a customer offers up some feedback or a feature request or whatnot, the thing that we're looking for is for them to have some skin in the game too. So if a customer says, hey, I've been trying Basecamp for a couple of days, I think that your product needs X, that's great. And I'm glad that they offered that up, but they're not a paying customer at that point. So it's, 50-50 if they're actually going to stick with Basecamp or go somewhere else. So the feature requests that we're hearing from people that have only used Basecamp a couple of days, it's going to be a lot different than somebody that's used it for a couple of years. Somebody that's got that skin in the game, that is going to give you some good information. Now, the people that have used your product for a while and are like that have that skin in the game, they're the ones that you can talk to and be quite honest with them and tell them, look, we might do this, we might not. If we can help you with some kind of workaround, that's always great, but you can't bank on the fact that that we're going to do this new feature that you're thinking about. I think that, being upfront with the customer and letting them know the situation on your side is going to help that customer be more receptive on their side of like receiving what you're saying. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I like that you're highlighting a little transparency can be effective and beneficial, because I do know that it's tempting as a support agent to figure out creative ways to kind of cover up what's going on, but also using just thinking skills and determining, is this customer like a lower level or more advanced, more years of experience? And obviously every customer's opinion matters, but prioritization is a large aspect in customer support. So it's an interesting tango to dance. How do you categorize the feedback and transfer them to product? Do you have meetings? Someone would like to ask. I know a little bit of the answer to this, but take it away.
Yeah, so everything that we hear goes into Basecamp. Since we use Basecamp, I mean, everything that we do in our company is pretty much put into Basecamp. One of the big reasons for that is that it makes it really, really accessible to product. So we were talking earlier about how to kind of get product to actually listen and use some of the stuff that you're doing. It helps if you're using the same tool they are and putting that information there. It's minimizing those that friction, those pain points, just to get to the information. So the way that Basecamp that we tackle it is if you say that you come to me and say, hey, Basecamp needs feature X. I'm going to say, wow, that's really interesting. Like, let's jump on a call and kind of work through why you need that and what situation is going on when you had that idea. Once I've got all that information, I go back into Basecamp and post it up as just a document there. So just like you would have a GitHub issue, or just like you would have a Dropbox paper, I think they call it, a Google Doc or anything like that. We lay out all of our notes, we lay out our situation. And at that point, you can then have a conversation with the product team around that specific situation. Now, as you keep seeing more and more and more of that situation happening, same thing. It becomes a document inside Basecamp. You can have a conversation around it, and then you can organize those situations together. So, if you're dealing with 5 other people that are in the same situation as you are, when you request that feature, you put those in a folder inside of a Basecamp project. That way people can start seeing those patterns that are happening between those. So that's the big thing for us. It all goes in Basecamp. Those similar stories, those similar situations, those get put together in the same folder type, whatever your app calls it, whether it's labels or tags or whatever, but they're all grouped together. That way, when you go to product and say, here's this thing I've been hearing about, here's the examples we have of this situation, they can, the product team can easily find it and easily start looking through that.
Great. And with that, what is the best channel for sharing feedback with your product team? Someone wants to know. Yeah,
the best channel is the channel that they use. That's the short and quick and dirty answer right there. Because if they're using, GitHub issues to line out stuff, and you're over here using Asana or Trello or Basecamp or something else, then it doesn't matter how good your information is. It's a point of friction for them to cross over into using that other thing. So whatever channel that your team uses, that's the one that I would just go right to as my kind of starting point.
Great. You mentioned lots of tagging, Chase. Someone wants to know, can you use lead scoring as well?
I don't even know what lead scoring is, so I'm going to go no. Give me more in the chat on what that is.
Sure. Let's have, I think, Gavin Taylor follow up with that. But I know that I could try and go and define it, but Gavin, why don't you feel free to tap in with a little bit more clarification on that? Thank you for that. Someone else wants to know, historically, what type of information will product need to take action? Detailed user stories. Someone has a large Trello board that they've filled with customer feature requests that the product then has access to, but product isn't really taking action yet. So what do you say?
Yeah, so the way that we tackle it at Basecamp is that once you've got those customer stories that you're working with, once you've got those situations, that lets you identify the problem. right? Everything starts with the problem that you're trying to tackle here. You take the problem, and that's when we on the support team still kind of own it. We go and talk to a designer, we talk to a programmer, we talk to product or whoever, and start lining out some options to tackle that problem. So some answers for that particular problem. Once we have a pretty good idea of how we could possibly tackle it, we'll write up what's called a pitch. And a pitch at Basecamp basically is, here's the problem. Here's detailed stories if you want to get that deep and start looking at those. And here's a couple of answers that we could tackle for that problem. So the pitch is exactly what it sounds like. It's just a doc that goes out and lays out the lay of the land. And that pitch then gets put in front of the product team, and they'll either say, yeah, that's something that we want to tackle in the next cycle that we're working. No, it's not something we want to tackle because of reason A, B, and C. Or it's something that's really interesting. We just don't have time to tackle it in this upcoming cycle. And maybe that gets, reset for the next cycle around. So for us anyways, it all starts with the customer feedback that you're getting, figuring out those specific situations, using that to then develop a pitch that then goes to product for, their consideration.
I haven't heard of that personally very much in this context. I've worked at agencies in the past. This is a little tidbit, but when I have, strategic and briefs have been necessary to create to then take to the creative team who fleshes out those ideas. So this sounds like a very exciting parallel to think of putting together that document in the persuasion process, because it really is that. Someone says, how do you avoid a boiling point if product doesn't take action on your shared feature requests?
Yeah, I think part of that first is just being honest that the majority of the feature requests that you see are just not going to happen. Whether you're a 50-person team like Basecamp is, or whether it's, a 500-person team that some companies are, it's just, you can't do everything, right? So I think that's the first kind of thing you have to be okay with. We're not going to do everything. The second thing at Basecamp is that we start fresh every 6-week cycle. So when we work on a new feature or a set of new features, we're going to spend 6 weeks on it. And at the end of the 6 weeks, we're either going to ship that feature or we're not going to ship that feature. Regardless of what happens there, the slate is then wiped clean for the next 6-week cycle. And when you wipe clean like that, it gives you freedom to look and go, all right, like what's most pressing at this moment? What's something that we need to get done at this particular moment? Those are the things that we're going to start working on this cycle. A good recent example, again, for Basecamp. So we're in the middle of a 6-week cycle right now. We're having to do a lot of tax work because more and more states are requiring sales tax to be collected. And so we have to start adapting our billing system to collect billing addresses and zip codes and figure out who owes what tax and where and how to report all that and how to actually send those entities that tax money. And it's ridiculous. And we don't want to do any of that. It's not fun work working on sales tax stuff, but it was something that had reached the boiling over stage, something that we couldn't put off any longer. So because we're doing these 6-week cycles, we can basically say, hey, no new features this cycle. We're working on tax work. It's going to take 6 weeks. And then we can kick back into more fun stuff.
Cool. It's like hitting that really exciting snooze notifications in your Slack. Just
Yes.
like, no, everyone, we're focusing on what we got to do.
Yeah.
Someone said as a follow-up, shouldn't we accept all customer feedback? They're just saying that they're kind of concerned that if we only consider it from tenured customers, that we're kind of risking our ability to venture into other markets.
Ooh, that's a good one. And I just want to let everybody know too, I just put a link in the chat about a recent pitch that we got. So if you want to look at like what exactly a pitch is for us and what it looks like, that link is going to have it for you.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. So when it comes to that customer feedback, I think this is part of being a support person. We're so ingrained to be empathetic and relate with the customer so much that it becomes hard to say no. And the thing is, you're going to say no more than you say yes. And sometimes that means, yeah, you say no to an idea that could be really interesting and, maybe is a moonshot and opens up a huge new market for you and for your team as a product. And that's just a risk that you have to take, because at the end of the day, you're only going to be able to do so much. You're only going to be able to work on so many new features for your product that saying no becomes the default and saying yes, it happens so rarely. So for us, for us to pick up a new feature, we really have to be in like the hell yes territory. Like we get excited about it. Sales tax being the example. Sales tax is one that we have to do. But there are lots of things that we wish Basecamp could do. It's just we haven't reached that point where it's like, hell yes, let's do this. And if it's not a hell yes, then that's a default to no. So yeah, it's just kind of one of the downsides of the work that we do is you're gonna miss some opportunities that maybe in the right circumstance was just like a huge moonshot and blows up your product.
Great, thanks for that perspective. Someone says, Chase, tell us an example of when Basecamp turned customer feedback into a new feature.
Yeah, so the most recent one that we did with us was the dot grid calendar inside Basecamp. So basically, for a long time, Basecamp had, most apps call it like an agenda list, an agenda view. So it's basically, you've got your events and your data to-dos inside a project, and they're just listed out. They're not in like your stereotypical grid, like day of the week kind of view, like Google Calendar kind of view, if that makes sense. To build some view like that, to build a view that looks like Apple Calendar or Google Calendar is an incredibly big project. The last time we did it in a previous version of Basecamp, it took us about 3 months and it tied up a good portion of the team. And it's just, everyone expects you to be as good as Google Cal or as good as Apple Calendar. And that's a very, very high bar. So we kept hearing this feedback that said, we want a grid cal, we want a calendar like that. And we said, all right, like, let's figure out what's really going on with this. So we did the interviews. We got these folks on phone calls and they walked us through their situation. And the problem that they were having was not that they needed like this big full grid calendar. The problem they had was that they couldn't see the space in their projects. One of the just perfect examples that we kind of built a pitch around was a lady who, she was a psychiatrist. She booked appointments with her clients and needed to see what days she was available and what rooms were available in her office because she worked with a couple of other psychiatrists as well. So for her, what they did was they literally painted a wall and put up a big grid cal on it, and people would mark what dates and what times and what rooms they were using. It's great if you're in the office, but if you aren't in the office, you can't see the wall, and you've got to go to the office to figure out if you can book a new client session or not. So once we realized that what was really going on here was they needed to see the space available, basically the free spots in their schedule, then we said, all right, we can design something for that. And we did. We went and designed basically this little, we call it a dot grid. So it's basically a miniature version of a calendar. It doesn't show you all the events inside a day cell. It shows you just, if there's an event on that day, there's a dot. If there's 3 events on that day, there's 3 dots on that particular cell. If there's not anything on that day, then it's just blank, it's empty. And when you look at that, you can easily see, all right, we have 4 rooms. There's 4 events on this day, we're full. We can't do anything like that. But we've got this day over here that doesn't have any dots on it. It's open, I can schedule somebody for that day. So when we took that approach, we were able to design and then ship that feature in 6 weeks using 1 designer and 2 programmers rather than having a big gnarly like 3-month ordeal like we had before. So yeah, that's the last big kind of feature request that basically we did the whole process. We started with, we hear the problem, we're going to figure out the situation you're in, we're going to take and turn that into something that we can do in 6 weeks and then ship that. Bravo.
Wow. Someone wants to know, can you, Chase, walk us through that pitch deck that you just shared?
Yeah.
If you want to share your screen, you can pull it up and have them see it visually, but you're more than welcome to just talk it out as well.
Yeah, okay. Screen share. Here we go.
Share the screen, someone's chanting.
This one. Thanks, Zoom. Thanks for making it easy. Yeah, so this is a pitch from Connor, who's one of our designers, and it's basically about making a move. So he talks about what happens right now where we break expectations around when something is moved from one project to another. The way that Basecamp did it at the moment was a move is not a move. A move is a copy and a delete. So we would take that thing that you're moving, delete it in that original spot, and make a copy of it in the new spot. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool. And that broke expectations in a couple of different ways. Basically, trash things were still fully accessible, still viewable, still commentable. So you're thinking you've moved this thing, but people still have access to that old thing that was left behind. And now you've got two different conversations that are going on. People were landing on the old address and not being redirected to the new one. Those deleted original events would actually stick around for 30 days in the trash, which just further complicated things. So basically, he walked through and said, look, here's the timeline of what's going on. And then he came down here and said kind of more details on why everything is screwed up, basically, and then said, look, what should we do about it? And he said, there's a way that we can actually resolve all of this. We've got to make a move. We've got to redirect rather than deleting and then and making a copy of that thing, basically. So he goes in and lays out a detailed description of these proposed solutions. Now, what you don't see in this is the comments that happen after the pitch. And basically, those comments, we go through and evaluate what the idea is, if there's any like hard spots in there, any confusing spots or anything like that, and whether or not it should be picked up. But yeah, that's the big one right there. I can also show you, I'm just gonna drag and drop this in. I forgot, I should have planned that we could actually just screen share in this whole thing because you can actually see like how we actually do some of this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm gonna walk over to our product strategy. Remember how earlier I said that, look, when we have these interviews, we're looking to group them together in different ways. That's what we're doing right here. We've got some interviews that have been done that basically don't really, like they're solos right now. We haven't seen that situation happen in a lot. For those that do kind of start showing up multiple times, we have these folders that are set up around certain things, whether it's recurring tasks or template start dates or things like that. One of the really good ones that we just had, let me find it again. It was notification on forwards right here. So you can kind of see how we write up one of our interviews here. We basically walk people through the timeline of what happened. So in this case, Angie had a problem, and we walk through that situation from start to finish. We lay out basically any details that might need to be put in there. Account context basically is what we talk about there. And then down here in the comment thread, we start discussing what's going on. I let folks know, like, look, we've seen this a couple of different times. Here's two other examples. We put out like what a common theme is for us at the time. Things getting missed was the common strand in this. And then we start talking about it. We start bringing in our product strategy. We start bringing in programmers. Eventually, Jason, our CEO, jumped in and had a couple of questions, so we answered those. And we go back and forth here. Now, this isn't ready for a pitch yet, but when it does become a pitch, we're able to go in and say, look, here's all the things that we've considered so far. Here's the pitch that we have, and product team can either pick it up or not as they want to. So yeah, that's kind of an inside look there.
Wow, who would have thought that it could be this thorough and systematic? The organization pays off, I'm sure, because product feels better towards the support team. The support team feels like they're satisfying the requests of these customers in a fair way that they can keep track of. Mm-hmm. And that product is being improved. That's really exciting. Thank you for showing us that. So how do you manage your prioritization of feature requests to float up to product when their priorities are always just moving ducks?
Yeah, and the thing here is that you don't worry quite as much on priority on your side of things. So with us, kind of going back to that detective analogy earlier, we treat every case, every new situation, every new feature request is the same as ones before it. So that when we take those together and write up a pitch for it, that pitch is no more special than any other pitch that the product team is considering. It's a level playing field across the, playing field, it's level across the playing field. The advantage to doing it that way is that when a pitch doesn't get picked up, it's not the end of the world for you. You know, one of the things that we saw early with pitches was that people would, just pour everything they had into this pitch, and then the product team wouldn't pick it up because the product team is looking at 30 or 40 different ideas for a cycle. It's just one pitch among the others. And that's the big thing to remember for our support team to remember when we go in and we do these. Yes, you're going to go in and you're going to make the best case possible for this new feature, but realizing at the end of the day, one, you don't have the full story of what product is looking at. You might not realize like the tax stuff is coming down the line that has to be done, and it's going to like consume everything for a cycle. And two, that this is just another pitch that you're working on. So no matter how much it's like your pet favorite feature that you would absolutely love for it to have, you got to kind of untangle from that and just kind of put forward the just the facts, ma'am, kind of reading of the situation.
Right. What is an important truth about product development that few services or support teams are really actually recognizing?
Ooh, that's a good one. See, some of these questions, like you need advanced so you can have like a really clear, concise answer on some of
We can
that
have
stuff.
another intermission. I can downgrade you again.
I think one of the big truths that people don't think about is that your default answer should be no. We are kind of like we were talking about earlier, like we are so conditioned to think that the customer is always right? Always say yes to the customer. The customer knows exactly what they need and what they desire, and we should be there to do everything that we can for them. For us at Basecamp, the default answer on all of this stuff is going to be no. Like, not because we don't like it, not because we don't think it's a great idea, but no, because we have to start somewhere, and starting from no and making a case for hell yes is better than starting with yes, we're going to do that, and then having to circle back around and being like, oh, well, really, no, sorry, it didn't work out. So that's it's always the toughest part of the interviews that we do too, because you basically, you're talking to this customer for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and getting all of these details and situations and all this great information. And at that moment, you're like, well, of course this makes sense. Of course Basecamp should have this feature. Of course we should like stop the presses and work on this. Like, it just makes sense. And then you get to the end of the call, and I have to tell the customer, look, I can't promise anything's going to come out of this. I can promise that we're going to think about it, because we can now start talking about this situation now that we have the facts and now that we know the lay of the land. That's step one, because like we can't even do that if we don't have this basic information here. But you have to realize, like, yeah, the product team's considering 30, 40 new pitches every single cycle. The support team is, man, I see dozens of feature requests every day that would make Basecamp a great product. And at that number, the default has to be no. So I think that's the dirty little truth that we should all just be open about. We have to say, look, it's a no until we can get to that hell yes. And even then, like, it's got to fit into the cycle. It has to fit into the work that we're doing.
Do you feel like you've seen customers' trust go up because of that, rather than disrespect kind of, fueling?
Yeah, I'd say the vast majority of customers that you talk to, when you explain that Basecamp is a small team, we work in 6-week cycles, we can only take on so much work without killing ourselves and working like 80-hour, 100-hour work weeks. When you tell them that, when you have that conversation with them, they realize, they recognize the limitations and the constraints that we're working within. A lot of times they just want to be heard. I know that's such a cliche, but just them knowing that we're listening and that we take the time out of our day to have a 30-minute phone conversation with them rather than just like shoot off a flippant email back to them. I think that goes a long way in establishing who Basecamp is, what our culture is like, and giving people an insight into how we work at the same time. They're always going to be like fuddy-duds, for lack of a better word, that just don't care, that think that you should do whatever they want with Basecamp, and that's on them. That's one where you can just be polite and say, here's the restraints. I'm sorry you're upset about it. If there's another product out there that does what they need, maybe you help them get over to it. But at the end of the day, customers will respect you more when you're honest and upfront with them, rather than just dragging them out with misleading, like, yeah, maybe one day.
Oh yeah, and if they can't they can't have gratitude for that process, you're going above and beyond. It's an anomaly going out and doing these customer interviews. If they can't at least demonstrate some patience through that, like,
yeah.
Anyway, I love that answer. And more than that, the fuddy-dud term you just used, your Chicago roofs are shining through. So
it's such a good phrase.
Someone wants to know, what is an important, let's see. What products or services do you recommend to collect and share feature requests and feedback through? Someone, you said use their channel of choice earlier. Is that right?
Yeah, use the channel that the product team is using. So for us, it's Basecamp. Everything's done in Basecamp. If you're a brand new company and you don't have like anything set in stone yet, like use Basecamp. It's going to make life easier. If your team uses Trello, then you're going to use Trello for collecting that stuff. If they use Asana, you're going to use Asana. If they use GitHub primarily, then you're going to use GitHub. Like whatever app that you're using, that the product team is using to basically talk about different ideas and write up their thoughts and explore how a feature might work, use that, because you're going to get a lot more traction out of it versus like, hey, Basecamp's great, we've got everything over here, and then nobody ever shows up and actually uses it.
Right. Okay, so Chase, I want to ask, what issues do you see with tagging systems? I'm sure you are talking to people day in, day out and being exposed to how they're operating. I know you say, many teams swing to one side of the pendulum where they're tagging everything like crazy, or the other where it's just kind of like, we are in over our heads, let's let it all mount up and do nothing. What do you say?
Yeah, so tags for us, and so we use Help Scout. Shout out to them, fantastic customer support app. The tags in there for us never revolve around certain features or customer requests or things like that. Tags for us in those situations become groups of customers that we need to get back to, usually in a short amount of time for something. So like earlier this week, last week, I forget, the days run together now, but whatever time we originally scheduled this webinar for, Basecamp went down, and Basecamp went down hard for 5 hours. So as we're getting these emails in from our customers, we're tagging all of those to make sure that after the downtime is done, we can go back to that tag and find the customers that we need to follow up with and let them know, hey, Basecamp's back in business. That tag is a one-time use tag. We're probably never going to refer to it again after we get the postmortem and everything wrapped up. So it's kind of like tag it, use it, and then that's it. When you start tagging around ideas or certain features or things, it never tells the whole story, because you get to the end of the day and you're like, oh, look, there was 5% more people that wrote in and said they wanted this feature versus last month. Like, all right, cool. Like, what do you do with that information at that point? It might be a lot of information. You might have 300 emails with that tag on it, but that's 300 individual stories that you have no idea of what's going on. So for me, it's one where when we're talking about customer feedback and feature requests, it's better to go ahead, like when you get that email, to go ahead and set up a call with them as quick as you can to find out what's going on. And then you take and you write those notes up and put them over in that whatever app you're using, Basecamp, like we were talking earlier. There's no tags involved in that kind of thing. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. It's more tagging around like tagging with intention. Like my intention is to let all these downtime customers know that we're back now, versus like tagging with, I don't know, with like unicorns and hopes of dreams down the road. It's like, yeah, maybe one day we'll do that feature. Like that doesn't do anyone any good.
Right. Great. Chase, are you diversifying the content that you're sending onto product in form of video or screenshots, or is it purely text that you're delivering that feedback?
Yeah, so we try to keep everything as async as we can and as simple as we can. So a lot of times that starts with just writing out what's going on with that customer, using a text as much as we can, walking through the timeline on there. If we need to do screenshots, then we do that. In rare cases, we might actually include the audio recording of the interview. Sometimes that can be helpful for a designer to actually hear a customer in their own words, that kind of thing. Very rarely do any videos or anything like that. The vast majority is going to be the written text for us. And that's a big cultural thing with Basecamp too. Like we really put the written text communication above everything else that we do, just because one, it's a lower barrier to entry, right? Like you don't have to use Cloud App or anything else to take videos or screenshots or whatever. It's just you can write out what you're thinking. And two, it's really, really accessible. So if you have teammates and coworkers like we do that are deaf, that can't hear any of the audio or the whatnot for the videos and things like that, it makes it accessible to them too. So our default is going to be text, and then if you build on top of that with screenshots, that can be helpful. And we usually don't go any further than that into like audio or video.
Gotcha. Cool. And so with screenshots, maybe the indications are also, you can use markups and things to, and that is a Cloud App plug, but
Yeah.
an easy way to
Cloud App's the best. I mean, I use it every day with customers. So.
Do you? Oh, good.
Yeah.
Great to hear. No, yeah, customer facing, I think, is especially where the GIFs and videos that you can do, short links and things, are super helpful for that. But okay, I did have one more question, unless anyone else here wants to, throw caution to the wind and throw one out there. Chase has been doing a great job, ladies and gentlemen. What is it?
15 minutes, like whatever you need.
What is a typical timeline for the approval and implementation process that you've seen at Basecamp?
Oh, there's no timeline at all.
Really?
That's one where it could be, I've literally seen it as quick as, I was trying to think. Okay, so there was one feature that we were working on that was really simple and really easy. It was basically when you were added to a project in Basecamp, you should have a way to leave that project if you didn't want to be part of it. So at the time, you could be added to a project and have no way out unless somebody deleted you from that project. And one of the feature requests that we had was, hey, I set up a bunch of these projects for my team just because I'm like the setup kind of person. I don't need to be on them now. I want to get out of them. So that was a really quick, like we got that email like Tuesday morning. We did the interview around lunch. We had it written up by the end of the day. The very next day, David, our CTO, comes in and says, you know what? That makes a lot of sense. Like, give me 10 or 15 minutes. And then we had shipped it like by the end of that day. So sometimes it's really, really short like that. A lot of it was because David had spent like the last couple of weeks doing businessy stuff, like managerial stuff, rather than actually coding something. So he saw like an easy, quick way for him to get in and have some fun coding something real quick. So like that was part of it. The other part was it was, really short, really simple, really concise and clear. So that worked in our advantage. So it could be like a 2-day quick thing. I've also seen it where when we were doing some interviews around how Basecamp customers use the projects to interact with their own clients, like some of those interviews stretched back 18 months, 24 months. So it was a very, very long process on those. So yeah, it's just like everything in between. There are some things that are going to be really quick. There are some things that, yeah, maybe they sit around for 6 months, 8 months, or a year or whatnot. And that's okay, because remember, like we're doing a clean slate every 6 weeks. So when that clean slate happens, every pitch, every idea has to fight for a place in that next cycle. There's no favorites or anything like that. So sometimes like something you worked on a year ago comes back and they're like, now's the right time to do it. And then sometimes it's, hey, we just thought about this yesterday and now's the right time to do it.
Right. Okay, good for you. Someone says, what products or services do you use? Oh, no. Pardon me. Do you have any advice for how to frame and present feedback to the product team, feedback that's coming internally from your own team rather than the customer side of things, like for customer support tools, etc.?
Yeah, we frame it the same way. So one of the things, like going back to the downtime that Basecamp had earlier, one of the apps that we use for Twitter replies just was really sluggish and couldn't handle the volume that we were seeing come in. So after we wrapped up with that and things kind of got back to normal, there was one of our team members that interviewed the other support team members who had used that app that day to find out what was going on, like what the pain points they were hitting were. And now they can take that and write something up for the internal team to use for our own customer support tools. So yeah, we can use it internally. I use it externally when I write to an app and request a feature myself. Basically, I sit down and it's like, hey, here's what's going on with me. Here's the situation I'm in. Here's what I'm trying to do and I can't do it. Here's why it's important that I need to be able to do that. And basically like info dump all of that stuff that I would want if I was on the receiving end. into a video or a text, email, or whatever, and then send it to them. It's kind of just being like, a good support person from one person to the other.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
But it's the same. We talked earlier about internal customers and external customers. Like it's the same process.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, our last question for you is from someone who apparently is just starting with a small, I'm going to read this verbatim. I'm just starting with a small company. Product team consists of the two co-president founders, and they were recently acquired and they're going to be growing, seeing a lot of growth. Do you have any advice on how I can lay down that strong foundation for our support team with just the two of us? LOL.
That is the perfect time to start laying some of this stuff, because what you said is your culture now is going to ripple out as you keep growing. So when the two of you start training other support team members that you hire, the way that you train them, and then eventually the way that they train other new employees, like that's going to ripple. So it's important. I don't want you to get the feeling like if you screw it up now, you can't fix it later, because you absolutely can. Basecamp did. Like when Basecamp started, our philosophy towards feature requests was basically, throw it in the trash, because Jason and David, our CTO and CEO, the co-founders, were in support emails all day, every day, and they knew what things customers were requesting, what they were thinking about. So they didn't need to think about it big picture of like how to translate that over to the product team. They were the product team. So for them, like throwing those feature requests in the trash, like it worked fine. But as you grew, like we had to adapt and do different things. So all that to say, set the culture now with you and the other person on the support team that's handling those emails. Go ahead and get into the mindset of investigating and talking with these customers. One of the biggest advantages that small companies have is that every new customer they get is somebody that knows you're a new company, that knows you're a small company, that is more than happy to help with you as you build your product and grow your company. So they're gonna open up and tell you all sorts of things about the situation they were in when they needed that certain feature that they were talking about. So yeah, it's the culture now. Get into that mindset of being a support detective, of being someone that can go and talk to a customer, that can get that information from them. And the cool thing at that point is like, you don't even have to worry about writing up pitches and all this other stuff that we talked about. You're on the founding team. Like you can just do it at that point. So yeah, it's a lot of fun when you're that size, and set the culture now, because it's going to be with you as you grow.
Fantastic. Whoever wrote it says, great input. Thank you. So on that note, what better feedback could you get? Thank you, Chase Clemons. We're so grateful to have everybody. A quiet round of applause for the principal, the head of support at Basecamp. You did a great job, and very clear that you know what you're doing, and we're so grateful that all these people could be your beneficiaries today, including myself. So thank you again. We will have all of this for you to send out so you guys can enjoy the feedback we gather from this webinar. And thank you again to our lovely guests for their questions. All right, everybody, happy Thanksgiving. Have a great weekend. Thank you again, Chase. Bye.